Yeah, that's right, we are back. Today I'm pretty excited because I'm here at Concrete Waves and the sun is finally out. We've had a bit of a run of hectic weather in Cornwall and I've only managed to skate outside once this year. So hopefully we'll get some action. The one thing that's going to hold us back is it is a little bit damp everywhere. And my experience of the sun being out and it being damp is generally, it doesn't tend to dry as quickly as you would think. The key to the drying on the concrete is the wind. And as you can hear in the microphone, there is zero wind. What I found happens is the air gets warm, but the concrete stays cool in the shade. And sometimes that can actually create even more moisture as opposed to it drying out. So I've taken the law into my own hands. I've got the squeegee and a towel out, tried to engineer a few parts of the park where I can get a little bit of a session in. And what I'd like to do today is share with you a little breakthrough I've had with the axle stall. Yeah, so I had a little session the other day where I was working on the tap-taparoo axle stall, where you come up and sort of balance on the back truck and do a little tap of the front truck on the coping just to prove that you're in control. And it proved to be a little bit harder than I imagined it would be. I had to make a few adjustments to my technique and it highlighted a couple of things that I was doing wrong in the axle stall. Now my axle stalls, I've had a bit of a checkered history. Some days I can do them, some days it takes a bit of a while to warm up to do them. And I've been a bit frustrated because I thought by now I would be 100% consistent with the axle stall. So the two things that the tap-taparoo axle stall managed to highlight was I wasn't manualing the front wheels up off of the coping. More often than not I was clipping the coping on the way in. Another problem with my technique was I was not putting enough pressure on my back foot as I came up to stall. I was putting all my pressure on the front foot because that felt nice and stable. And again, that was sometimes knocking me off balance and was making the lock-in not quite as stable as I liked it to be. So the two things that I've changed in my normal axle stall now is to come up, clear the wheels from the coping by really rushing the front foot up in the air. And the second thing is to try and pivot round on that back foot, trying to keep the weight off the front foot and keep my shoulder rotating all the way through so I can get a nice fast axle stall. The old tap-taparoo axle stall sort of felt a bit more like a pivot with a couple of front truck taps thrown in. So hopefully this park will dry out. You can see it's still pretty wet and you can probably hear there is zero wind. And if it does dry out, I'm going to try and get an axle stall first try. And that's my gold standard for having learned the trick. I reckon if I can get out of the van with cold legs and then crack straight in to an axle stall, consider that I've pretty much got it dialed. Okay, enough of my yakking. Let's give it a whirl. Okay, that's a fun little warm up using this pocket as a sort of mini ramp. It's a little bit trickier because the coping's curved. So as I come up, I just need to keep my shoulder coming through so that the front truck will find its nook so it doesn't go feeble. As I'm coming up, I'm trying to stay as relaxed as possible, keep my arms down by my side. That seems to stabilize the pump. And then I'm putting my weight on the back foot and also pivoting and keeping my head and shoulders moving round to look back where I'm coming from. Trying to balance on that back heel on the back foot, and then it's just a case of balancing and tapping the front foot down when I want to get that taparoo axle stall. This also helps me get the normal axle stall, so I'm going to go and try and do a few regular axle stalls now using the sort of balance technique with the shoulder coming through and just see if I can just tap it and then come straight back in. Okay, I want to test out my technique on some bigger transitions and on some different coping, like the pool coping. The park's starting to dry out, but it's still just got a little bit to go. So the one thing I've noticed with this early manual and clearing the front wheels technique is that the consistency seems to have gone up. So regardless if I get the lock in a little bit weird or even come round too far so that both my heel side wheels are on the coping, my shoulder following through seems to jam that against the coping. It feels secure and I can come back in. So with the balancing on the back foot a bit more, it's almost as if the front foot can lock in willy-nilly. And I had a few that were sort of the wheel on top of the coping, some that were cross-locked, some that were somewhere in between. So while we're waiting, I'm going to test my consistency and see how many axle stalls I can get back to back in this pocket, and then we'll test it on something a bit more challenging, taller, maybe a bit of pull coping. Yeah, that felt good testing out the consistency. I had a couple of issues. Number one, if I did any more than 5 or 6, started getting dizzy going round and round, ended up coming off the board. Also, that little pocket's on a wonk, so one side requires a little bit more pump than the other to get up on the axle stall. But it's good practice to try and see if a technique's sound enough to involve some improvisation. And I managed to get away with a few that I would normally fall off of because I could correct. And again, just clearing those front wheels seems to cure all the problems. Next up, I'm going to give it a whirl on the pull coping. Now the transition's a bit taller, it's definitely steeper, and that pull coping sticks out both at the front of the ramp and up in the air, so it's a little bit more tricky to lock into. Wish me luck. Oh, that's feeling pretty nice on that pull coping. I love the way it locks in. Just a little bit more of a manual to get it over there due to the sticky outiness. Also managed to get a couple of tappity tap taps. So I'm going to up the ante now, see if I can get an axle stall in the steeper pockety bit. Yeah, that pocket's pretty fun. It didn't feel that different in terms of technique. It was just a little bit scarier. I had to delay my axle up just a little bit longer. I also came up with a fun challenge, which was to try and axle stall the pocket and then do a backside carve and then axle stall in the shallow end. And I found that mixing up the transition sizes and having to sort of adapt and improvise on the hoof was also good practice. Next, I'm going to change it up again. I'm going to go into the big bowl, onto the bigger transition, maybe do a bit on the steel coping and also test out that spine. Whew. Well, that's it for this video. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed testing them out on the spine. That adds in a little bit more jeopardy and there's a bit of a psychological element. When it locks in, it really locks in hard because there's a bit of a bevel out of that double coping on the top. And also I feel mindful of going too far. There's no deck to step off on at the back. On the bigger transitions, everything seems to happen a little bit mellower, a little bit slower and smoother. I also enjoyed including a few rat-a-tat-tats. They felt quite fun on the spine, and that's my new favourite trick. So I now feel pretty confident with the axle stall. I feel like I've cracked that last bit. When it goes all right, it is the axle stall I'm looking for, which is to go up, clear the front wheels, hook that back wheel on, leave most of my weight on that back foot, do what I want with the front truck, continue that front shoulder coming round, and then enter back in. The next stage is to try this out in the deep end of the pool. That's a bit of a dream trick for me. I had one session on it the other day before it rained, only had about 10 minutes and I managed to get up there locked in and also managed to axle back in. So I've got all the key components. And once I get that squirreled away, I'll do a full video detailing the process of getting an axle stall and a 50-50 grind in the deep end of the pool. If you're new to the channel, feel free to hit subscribe. I make new videos every week. You can also follow me on Instagram @JohnBishopSkate. As ever, my name's been John Bishop, and I'm a middle-aged guy learning how to skate.